Jerome Tang starting off this staff.
We are now joined by Jerry Hill, the owner of Jerry Hill's Baylor Bear Insider. He covered yesterday's opening practice of Baylor spring drills coming off the Big 12 title and the Sugar Bowl victory as well. Jerry, thank you very much. And it seemed like Aranda has become so comfortable. I listened to all of it. I wasn't able to be there because of the time. But it just seemed like he is as comfortable as he's ever been. And I thought last year he was comfortable for most of the year as well.
Yeah, I mean, David, if you look back to that compared to like 2020, that first year, I think it's night and day. You know, I think he has relaxed a lot, and he's just a different guy than he was back in 2020. You know, and maybe some of that is he's got a Big 12 championship now. I don't know, but you're right. I think he does seem very comfortable in his role.
Jerry, what do you think the quarterback competition will look like over the long haul?
I mean, he said yesterday that he'd like to have a starter or the number one guy by the end of spring. I'm not sure if it happens by then, honestly, Paul. I mean, I think, you know, there will be a competition certainly through the spring, and you'd like to have a guy coming out that you feel good about. But, I mean, you got two guys that have won some big games, huge games for them. You know, Gary got them to the Big 12 championship game pretty much, but, you know, Blake won that game. And got hurt, obviously, in that game and wasn't able to play in the Sugar Bowl. But, you know, Gary won a lot of games before that, and then he won the Sugar Bowl. I think the defense won the Sugar Bowl, but, you know, he was the quarterback of that game. So I look at it as going through the whole spring, and it wouldn't surprise me if you don't have a starter until fall camp.
Yeah, it almost feels like, and I think I'm guilty of this as well, Jerry, just seeing a little bit of Blake Shapen. We saw more of him than Zeno, but it was like when Zeno came in and threw a couple passes, everybody just expected he was going to be the starting quarterback. So it's almost like Shapen played a couple games and everybody just assumes, and me as well. But you know, the more I sit and think about it, I'm like, well, yeah, we really didn't see that much. And when we did see it, it didn't take long for him to get hurt and, you know, all of that. So it is a bigger question than I think probably we realized after the season.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Craig, because I felt the same way. You know, everybody was ready to, you know, ordain Jacob Zeno after a couple of passes. Now, you do have a little bit more of a book with Blake Shapen, but it is only a couple of games. I mean, he finished the K-State game, he won the Texas Tech game, and he won the Big 12 championship game. Now, he looked really good in that Big 12 championship game. So, you know, to me, though, I think you go in. You know, I think the way Dave put it yesterday is, you know, Gary's got to go in there and assert himself like I'm the guy. And, you know, Blake has to outplay him. Blake has to be better or he won't be the starter. So that's the thing. I think, you know, you're coming at it from two different positions, really. Gary's just got to, you know, kind of affirm, you know, reassert himself. And Blake's got to go win the job.
So, Jerry, I don't want to read too much in, you know, between the lines on what Aranda says, but, you know, last year they started spring and had a group of running backs, but clearly didn't have exactly what they wanted because they had to move Abram Smith over. And then just hearing him yesterday, I mean, I know people are excited about Tay McWilliams, and there's a bunch of guys, Jordan Jenkins and others, but do you feel like they have the guy that they're going to need or the guys in that room, or do you think that they're still almost searching for that kind of like last year?
Yeah, I think, you know, certainly going into spring, there's nobody there that you would go, that's your guy. You know, but you think about, again, Craig, go back to last spring, and, you know, everybody thought it was going to be Treston Ebner. You know, he's not that really physical downhill runner, and I think that's what they'll look for in camp is a guy that's going to go hit somebody rather than trying to avoid the hit or you know, be hit, you know, that kind of thing. He wants a guy that's going to, you know, really kind of be that guy. And maybe it's on the roster now. Maybe you go look for somebody else. Maybe you bring Dylan Doyle over and make him the running back by the end of spring. I don't know. But, yeah, I think it'll be a process of trying to figure out who that guy can be and if you do have it on campus right now.
So they have weapons. They have some that they got to find as well. You just don't lose Ebner and Abram Smith, who was a great story, along with what Tyquan Thornton did as well. How many of the youngins, dudes that look like they're alphas in some ways when you watch them? Now they got to go do it on the field, but they've got some young men who have been cultivating. Your thoughts about some of the youngins stepping up as offensive weapons?
Yeah, David, they do have a ton of young guys. I was actually doing something about. I didn't even know Gavin Holmes was still around, honestly. And he was one of the guys that we got yesterday in media. And man, you look at his numbers compared to anybody else. I mean, they don't have anybody else that has more than a handful of catches. But man, there are some dudes out there. I mean, Hal Presley. He's a guy. I mean, he's the one that had originally signed with Auburn and came back. He's one of them that I think I would look at. Monterey Baldwin, certainly he had his moments last year. And I'm thinking about receivers, but there's running backs too. Like you said, Tay McWilliams, Craig Squirrel Williams. We kind of forget about him because he's been hurt, but that's a guy. I mean, maybe he's not big enough to be that kind of running back, but I think he is a guy that could give you a lot of help. And then, I'm sure you guys saw it or heard it from the audio that they had moved Josh Fleeks to running back. So maybe he's the guy. You don't usually see that, a receiver switch to running back that's the physical guy that you're looking for. But Aranda said, he's not just a third down guy. He could be that, every down back.
So, Jerry, I want the receiver depth chart right now. Off the top of your head. Top 4.
Like I said, I was looking at it and I'm like, I don't know. There's a lot of guys, and who knows? I mean, I don't know if Gavin's 100%. If he's ready to go, I think he's in there somewhere. But you got to like Hal Presley. You got to like Monterey Baldwin. Jalen Ellis is still there. They've got a lot of guys, and that'll sort itself out through spring. But you don't have maybe the proven guys like a Tyquan Thornton, like an R.J. Sneed that you had last year. Even Drew Estrada, the grad transfer. They had guys that were more proven. These guys are more on potential and what you've seen from them, but none of them have really done it in games.
Jerry, in terms of some new hires, Dallas Baker, now the wide receivers coach, and you also had Ronnie Wheat as safety and special teams coach. I mean, I know it's only the first practice, but if you had an opportunity to just cross paths with those guys, and if so, what have been your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't realize how big a guy Dallas Baker is. I went out there and I was intentionally watching the receivers, and Dallas was out there. And at first I didn't know that was who it was because they were doing special teams work at that point, and I didn't realize that that's who it was. But he is a big dude. I got to think he's like 6'4". Because and this name would not mean anything to y'all, but Julius Denton that played basketball here, that's who I thought was out there because Julius is like a 6'4", 6'5" guy, and it did look a little bit like him. But yeah, Dallas is a big guy, and just from listening to Gavin, I think he's a guy that they really like. Like I think Gavin said, this is as tight as the room has ever been, and I think that's him, orchestrating that. Dallas Baker orchestrating that, and that was one of the things that I had to research. I believe this is his Gavin's 4th receivers coach since he's been here. Yeah. So he's been through a lot of guys. And then Ronnie Wheat, I did get a little chance to watch him, and I think he's going to be kind of one of those fiery guys a little bit, like get you kind of pumped up. I mean, kind of a defensive mentality. I think he's going to give them a little bit of that. So, I think they were both good additions. Dallas came from Buffalo, was up there with a former Baylor guy. So, and then Ronnie came from Nevada. So I think both of those were good additions. And just from what I saw from Ronnie, I think he'll really fit in well with that defensive staff.
A lot of things that Aranda said yesterday, but one of them that caught my attention because when you think you do have a lot back, those who know the system and all the whatever else goes with it, the daily routine, that he said you still have to kind of start all over as far as teaching, that you don't take anything for granted, even if someone's been there 3 years or is a 2-year starter or whatever.
Right.
That seemed to be, I don't know if that's unique. Maybe I've just never heard that answer before. Is that something that struck you as well?
Yeah, I remember when he said it too. And then, obviously when we went through and transcribed and stuff, that is probably one that jumped out at you. But, I think that's just that mentality that, that kind of mentality of, hey, we haven't done anything yet. Like one of the things in the offensive line, David, is they're still going to be rotating those guys. You remember last spring, every day they didn't even know where they were and what position they were going to be at or what side of the line. And I think they're still going to do some of that just to, make sure that those guys are trained. So, as good as Connor Galvin has been at left tackle, he's going to be playing some of those other spots just to get him ready in case they, go through some stuff. And then I think one of the things kind of in that whole picture is, because I remember he said something about this too, that in case we have another Gary Bohannon and Blake Shapen case, you never know when your time is going to come, because Blake Shapen didn't know he was going to be out there the next play, but then he is, and he's got to be ready. So I think it's some of that too, that not just those starters, but everybody's got to be ready to go because of stuff like that. And because of, anything that can happen. Of course, last year, I think some of it too was you were still worried a little bit about COVID and what losses you might have there. That's not as much, evident anymore, but, you just never know. So I think that's some of it too, Smoke, is just getting everybody ready. And don't assume that, Connor Galvin knows everything he needs to know.
How weird is it to see no Jalen Petrie, no Terrell Bernard, no Kalen Barnes, no Raleigh Tejada for the first time in like 7 years?
Yeah, it is weird. And I did think about that because, man, those were kind of your go-to guys, particularly for us, in the media, that those were ones we really like to talk to. Terrell, I mean, he's been awesome for how many every years. Jalen Petrie, the great story behind him, but just a great guy to talk to. And then I saw Treston Ebner in the parking lot yesterday, and just you do miss those guys, but I'm sure there will be other guys that pop up. I think Dylan Doyle is one of those guys that I think he's going to make a big difference this year, and I think he'll make a big jump this year.
Yeah, the inside backers, I mean, you don't replace Bernard, you don't replace Petrie among some others,
right.
But I do think Dylan Doyle, the year he had with Matt Jones, a guy that was in the doghouse after that Oklahoma State game, turned out he started making more and more plays, and we know he's physically and incredibly gifted. So do you yet own 100% of the insider?
Mac Rhodes thinks he does. I'm going to get real trouble. You're going to get me in a lot of trouble, David Smoke.
I tried to. That's the only reason we had you on. It had nothing to do with Baylor football and or anything else. All right. Are you a little bit you, of course, know all about Baylor, have covered them forever with the Trib, and then now with what you've done for many, many years with your insider. But is it kind of a head against the wall, brick wall, that there's no Philadelphia or Wichita, Kansas coming up here in the next day or two?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, and this was one thing I looked at because, the last time the women didn't make it out of the second round was 2008. So other than COVID, this is the first time that I haven't covered a team into late March since I've been at Baylor, and this is my 14th year at Baylor. So, yeah, certainly, and I did think the men were going to have a tough time, getting out of those first two rounds, and who knows what North Carolina does from here, but that's a really good team. The women's game was very frustrating because I think that's a team that, certainly could have made a Final Four run. But I think it's one of the things where their depth kind of caught up with them. And, I just don't think they were ready for the physicality that South Dakota gave them. And then obviously they just could not make a bucket. The guards just were completely off from 3-point range. So that was the frustrating one. But, really good years for both teams, though, and both teams had very short rosters. But yeah, I was certainly expecting to go somewhere, get a Philly cheesesteak or, some good food in Wichita. So I don't get any of that. I guess I'll have to stay around here and enjoy all the Waco fare.
I just hope that both teams can have more than 7 players at most times next year. That would be fantastic. But, Jerry, we just had the news, and you may have heard it right as we started the segment, but Uric Malagi, Texas assistant, joining Jerome Tang's Kansas State staff, which still feels a little strange to say, but we're going to have to get used to it. Your thoughts on Jerome Tang getting his big opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's great for him. I think it's going to be tough for Scott because, if you've noticed, he doesn't play any of his assistants, and he didn't want to play. I think he played his brother in one of those, exhibition type games, but he didn't want to play him either. And I don't think he's ever really wanted to play any of his assistants, but he doesn't have any choice now. And I do think Coach Tang was ready for this. I wasn't sure if it would be in the Big 12 like this, but I think that's a great opportunity. Everybody says, that's tough to win in Manhattan, Kansas. But I do remember, and he even mentioned that in his quotes, I think it was just a release statement, but the Octagon of Doom. I mean, that is a tough place to play when they've got it going. So I think he can win there. I think he just waited for the right opportunity, because you got to think he's had plenty of chances to take another job. He was waiting for the right one. He's 55, so he needed probably, if he was going to be a head coach, this is when he needed to go make that jump. So happy for him, and it is tough not having him here, because he's just a fun guy to be around, honestly, guys. I mean, he's a really neat guy. I know you guys have talked to him some too, but didn't you kind of see him as a guy that I just saw head coach in him? I saw him as a guy that could be really comfortable in that role.
Yep. Well, from the time he had to sit in for Scott when he was, the little bogus NCAA suspension, and then COVID. I mean, like, he never looked like a guy who was like, okay, what does Scott do? Yeah. Okay, what had like a little cheat sheet of like, okay, when a guy gets 3 fouls, we take him out. Okay. It was never that. He was ready.
I remember the game at Lubbock. I don't even remember what year that was, but that was one of those games you're talking about, Paul. And man, I mean, he won that game. And I don't think that ever phased him. And even just, and maybe I'm looking at it a little bit from a media perspective too, but man, he is just great in interviews and stuff. And I think he's a home run for K-State.
He'll win the press conference. He already has it. He's not even just now landed in Manhattan for the press conference introduction tomorrow. Jerry, thank you very much. Jerry Hill, Baylor Bear insider, with us when it comes to various topics, especially Baylor football and both Baylor men's and women's basketball. When we come back, Christopher Stock.